everybody. As Lynn said, my name is Precious. I work at Casa Grande Ruins Monument. I work there as the Tribal Education Liaison as well as the Education Coordinator, so I do a lot of site visits and school visits, school programs and things like that. I also do a lot of tribal consultation, so my job is to kind of help give our tribal affiliates a voice in what we teach in our education programs, and especially what we're teaching to the public. But I'm going to let Preston introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
How you guys doing? I'm Preston Ridgeway. I am a park guide at Casa Grande Ruins. So I will give guided tours, I talk to visitors daily, walk the grounds. I also work with Precious doing education tours. So we'll have field trips that come out. A lot of the fourth graders in the Arizona area come out. We get to have the honor of taking them around and teaching them about the site and the culture and everything like that. So thank you for having us. We look forward to spending a little time with you guys this evening.
Just a question, by show of hands, how many of you guys have been to Casa Grande Ruins? Nice. Okay, all of you guys. Great. So we're just going to start off first by talking a little bit about the National Park Service itself.
All right, so I'm going to start you guys off with the National Park Service. Obviously, that's who Casa Grande Ruins falls under. The Park Service was founded in 1916, so it's been around for quite a while. That is our patch, our logo, as you can say. The arrowhead represents the culture and the human history. The bison represents the wildlife that we protect in the Park Service. The sequoia tree represents the lands that we protect, the plant life. And the mountains, the prairie, and everything else represents natural habitat and resources and recreation. So I'm fairly new to the Park Service. I started working for the Park Service this July. So for the longest time, like many of you, I enjoyed the Park Service by going to the parks and being able to enjoy nature and having it preserved to a point where we could go and visit it, but it was also preserved to the point where it wasn't being built up and commercialized, to try to be able to have a fine balance between those two right there, which was awesome and fantastic. One of the reasons why I decided I wanted to work for the Park Service. Since working for the Park Service, I've kind of learned more now. I'd say my favorite part is the lands that we protect and preserve that you don't see or don't have access to. Working Casa Grande, many of you have been there, as you said, the compound and the access that you guys have to is a very small portion of our footprint. Maybe 3 acres is what the general public is allowed to go to. Our park is almost 500 acres in whole. The rest of that land is protected and preserved for the preservation of the history of the culture. All the rest of the sites are backfilled and buried. We get a lot of guests all the time that say, well, why can't we go out there? We want to go out there, we want to experience it. That's not the point. The point is to preserve it for future generations, to preserve it for the wonderful culture and history that it has. And that was new to me. I didn't know that because you just see what you see. Go to the Grand Canyon, you can hike around. So it's really amazing and special, what we protect and preserve that we can use for recreation purposes, but also land that we just don't even have access to. It's there and supposed to be the way it was meant to be, just left alone into itself, which is a very special aspect that I appreciate now working with the Park Service. So you see a picture here. These are some park rangers back in the day. We still get to wear the cool, awesome flat brim hat right there. In this picture is a man by the name of Frank Pinkley. Frank Pinkley was born in 1881 in Missouri, and like many in his time, came down with tuberculosis, and doctor said you should move to Arizona for that tuberculosis to help it with the dry weather, so he did. And when he came here, he fell in love with the desert in the Southwest. 1901, he was hired as Casa Grande Ruins' first live-in custodial superintendent, basically. He quickly fell in love with Casa Grande Ruins and saw how special and important this place was, and continuously wrote reports and requests for funds and personnel to come and restore and protect the great house and the ruins at Casa Grande. He tried to get funding not only to protect it, but to build permanent housing so we could live there, kept getting denied. So he decided to live in a tent for the first few years that he was there. After being in a tent for about 4 years, he finally was able to save up enough and basically make a half tent, half home structure. And then in 1910, he was able to finally, with his own money, spend $600 to build a house at the Casa Grande Ruins site, because he felt that strongly about being there and protecting it, that he spent his own money even after getting denied over and over again for funds. After he lived there for a while, he was able to do multiple projects to help the monument, to help preserve it, but not enough. He kept getting denied. He would ask for $2, he would get a nickel. So in 1914, he decided to take measures in his own hands, and he decided to run for the Senate, and was elected. And he wasn't sworn in until 1950, so he stayed on until he was sworn in. And then with having that power in the Senate, he was able to make friends, make favors, and work the way through the system to get the money for Casa Grande Ruins that it deserved. And then in 1918, after some negotiation with the National Park Service and others, he came back as the living superintendent of Casa Grande Ruins again, where he stayed pretty much the rest of his life. Not only did he come back as the superintendent of Casa Grande Ruins, he also came back with basically being in charge of several different monuments throughout the area. So all the monuments that are in this area related to the culture here, he ended up overseeing all of them because that's how much he cared. At one point, he was even offered the superintendency at the Grand Canyon, and it was a very prestigious job as it is today, and he turned down that opportunity for his love of this area and this particular culture. That he said no thank you to one of the most prestigious parks at the time, and said that he wanted to concentrate to where his heart was and what he really thought was important. So it's really amazing that he fell in love with this place so much that he turned down promotions, bigger prestige, his jobs, spent his own money so he could stay here and take care of what he felt near and dear to his heart. So it's a really outstanding thing. 1935, he passed away. I think fittingly, I know it's never a good time to pass away, but he passed away after giving a speech at Casa Grande there on the premises. So he lived and died where he felt special to his heart, which I think is all we could ask for in this wonderful life. So that's what I have on Pink. We'll wait for the slides to get back up, and then we'll go into the rest of it for you folks. I don't know if I done at the beginning when I had more to talk about.
All right, so what all of you guys are looking at right now is Compound A. Compound A, of course, houses the Great House. You can see around the Great House we have some lower walls that are ranging anywhere from 2 to 5 feet tall. The reason why these lower walls are so short to the ground, not because the people were necessarily so short, but just because of weather deterioration, things like wind and rain can really weather down these walls. So that's why they're not as well preserved as the Great House, where we see we have a roof structure covered right on top. The roof structure was built in 1932. There used to be another roof structure in 1904, and it was all made of wooden beams, essentially. So it was very claustrophobic and very close to the Great House, and so they expanded it into this roof structure, and it's been here since 1932. On top, there's a lightning rod, and the cool thing about the roof structure, though, is when it was constructed, the legs of the roof actually, they have gutters in them. So when it rains, rain collects up in the legs of the roof structure, and it actually disperses to other places in the park that need that water, that need water for vegetation. The Great House itself was built in 1350 CE. It was one of the last structures at its time that was being built, and it was estimated that about 2,000 people lived here on site at the time. These lower rooms, it's really unsure of what was being done or what was being practiced in them, But in some of these rooms, they found an abundance of cooking pots. So when it was being excavated, they found these pots and they were very black and burnt at the bottom. And that indicates that they were placed over a fire for cooking purposes. On the north side of the great house, that would be on the right side, there's a whole line of rooms which we refer to as the ceremonial rooms. When it was being excavated by Frank Pinkley, they found all kinds of things like quartz crystals, they found arrows with red paint on them, they found cotton sashes. So we suspect that that might have been for some ceremonial purpose of some sort. There was a disturbance of the site starting in the 1920s. As Preston was mentioning earlier, that Frank Pinkley did have a love for the site, but that did cause a lot of damage in his efforts in trying to really preserve the structures itself. And some of these lower walls, I don't know if you guys have been onto the compound and really taken a closer look at the walls, but you'll see things like chicken wire, you'll see rusted nails. Even in the great house itself, we have concrete slabs. And again, their intentions might have been for good, but that's really starting to take an effect on the walls now. In the park, a lot of these walls are under construction simply because there's too much weight being added from things like the chicken wire and the rusted nails. In the great house floor, actually the next picture, on the right side you can see kind of like a black tar, a black substance. It's actually asphalt. In the 1920s, the National Park Service actually wanted to coat the entire monument in this asphalt because they thought it would help preserve it. But luckily, it only stayed to this one floor. You can see it isn't holding up too well, so you can only imagine what it would have been like if the great house or if any of the lower walls were covered in this asphalt. Frank Pinkley and also a man named Jesse Fuchs were really the main ones that were excavating this site. Unfortunately, they didn't have a boss themselves to oversee what they were doing in the park, so a lot of what they were doing was on their own terms and what they thought was best for the park. You can see that on the right side that we actually used to give tours inside of the great house. We closed it off to the public simply because there was a lot of graffiti, there was a lot of being damage done on the insides. So this is a map, and you can see that there was an old stagecoach route that ran right by the great house, so tons of people were visiting it, fortunately looting, and they were also inscribing their names into the walls. So we have inscriptions that date back to 1870. In our visitor center, we actually have a book that kind of keeps track of all these inscriptions that we have that are inside of the great house walls. The latest one was actually in 2017. Somebody wrote on the north side of the walls, I heart man on the inside. So that's the reason why because people come to the park and ask, well, can we go inside the great house? Can we go see what it looks like? 30 years ago I came and we were allowed to go inside. So this is the reason why it's closed off to the public now. The great house itself is made out of caliche. It's a common misconception that all southwestern prehistoric buildings are made out of adobe bricks, but that's not necessarily the case for our site. Caliche and adobe are not the same things. Adobe brick strength depends on its clay content, and that can be from 40 to 45%. Caliche has little to no clay in it whatsoever, but it needs calcium carbonate to bind its soil particles together. Caliche is a natural soil formation, so that develops right underneath the topsoil, but it also forms above the underground water table. So when they were here and they were constructing these walls and they were constructing the great house, they were mixing this caliche in earthen pits. They were adding water to it, and in a sort of a way they were kneading it like dough. It doesn't pour as well as concrete, but this was very laborious. They would build up a few feet, they would let it dry, and they would continue on to the next layer. So if you were to go into the great house where you would see its outside walls, you can actually see their stopping points. There's very prominent horizontal lines on the great house walls. The smooth plaster, you can see that it's a very smooth texture on the inside walls. That is original plaster. That plaster is 1/2 inch thick. And to create this fine plaster, they kind of had to pulverize this caliche. They would sift it through baskets, and they would add water and ash to it. And so when this was all mixed together, it came out kind of like a sticky consistency. And they would coat this on the walls, they would coat it on the floors, and also coat it in fire pits. Adobe is much more easier to work with, but caliche is much more durable, which is why we have these structures still standing to this day. So again, it's very durable, and if you were to try, I don't know, to take modern tools to it, like jackhammers, it's very impenetrable. It's a very hard substance. And the inside of the walls, the caliche is actually 4 to 5 feet in width, so they're pretty thick. Besides the graffiti that was made by the public, we also have prehistoric inscriptions that are on the insides of the walls. You can see the ranger holding up a flat hat to prehistoric inscription. And on the right side, looks like a maze or kind of like a labyrinth design of some sort. We believe there to be more inscriptions on the insides of the walls, but of course to modern graffiti, it's very hard to see those inscriptions now. So this picture right here actually shows compound B. We have multiple compounds that are on site. We have compound A, we have compound B, C, D, E, and F, but compound A is the only one that's open to the public. Compound B does not look like this right now. As Preston mentioned earlier, it is backfilled to protect the prehistoric structures underneath. But the interesting thing about compound B is that it's a platform now. It's the second largest compound that's actually on site. And along with the Great House tours, we also did backcountry tours. So back a long time ago, we actually used to let people come through the Great House, or not the Great House, compound B. Frank Pinkley, because he wanted to really up the viewer interactions and to get more of the public to come visit the site, he actually built staircases that you could actually go up and peer inside the compound B itself. So what you're looking at right here is also compound B, and you can see that there's kind of like an adobe style housing on there. This was the scene for the Arizona pageant, which was held in 1926. Telephone poles were laid out for seating on the west side of compound B. Power lines were installed. Again, you can see the Pueblo houses, but this was all done by Brian Cummings. He was the Dean of Archaeology at the University of Arizona. And part of a project for his class and his students was to actually put on a performance here on compound B. It was not so great at the time because it was doing a lot of destruction to the platform B itself. But they would dress up essentially as Native Americans. They would dress up as Spanish conquistadors and put on these types of plagues. This has done a lot of damage, especially in compound C, because there were so many people that were coming in, and it was really damaging the prehistoric walls that we have on the inside. To this day, if you were to go out there, you can actually still find their bottles and their cans that they were drinking out there. For some reason, people have a very interesting collection of these historic bottles and cans that are on the backcountry sides. So you can see back in this picture on the west side, so you can see that open space is where the telephone poles would have been. When they did backcountry tours here in compound B, it wasn't very safe because these were 2-hour tours, and they told you that couldn't go to the restroom, there was no water out there was no shade, and there wasn't even a road for you to walk on. So again, that was a very dangerous thing, especially for visitors who had any kinds of disabilities or anything like that. The dates for compound B, this site was estimated around to 1150 to 1300 CE. Inside there was rooms, fire pits, and also courtyards on top of these mounds. And you can see around here some of these black images, those are actually mesquite trees. To this day, if you were to go out there, those mesquite trees aren't there anymore. And that is simply because of the underground water table. When Frank Pinkley, he was actually living on site and he dug his well, he could dig 10 feet and find water. But if you were to dig for water now in the underground water table, you would need to dig 250 feet to reach water. So the mesquite trees, their roots at the time could actually reach the underground water table, but it was started depleting in the 1940s, causing a massive drought and causing a lot of the vegetation out here to die. So that's why when you go out there, you don't really see a lot of this vegetation growing anymore. Because in the 20s, you couldn't either walk or drive through the site itself because it was just covered in bosks and mesquite. On the north and southeast sides of Compound B, there's actually trash mounds. And these trash mounds are prehistoric. And what the people were doing back then was they would essentially take all their trash, like pottery sherds, they would take shells, rings, bracelets, and they would dump them all in a pile. And when this was excavated, they could actually see the timelines in when these things were created, because again, they were all dumped in different times of the year. The excavation of Compound B was done by Jesse Fuchs in 1907, and it's backfilled today. So if you were to go there, it just essentially looks like a huge pile of dirt. So I want to bring it back to the Great House because it is the largest existing prehistoric structure in North America. But of course, the big question that we get is why? Why was this built? What were the people doing in here at the time that they needed a structure this large? As a National Park Service, we don't have the ability to say what it was used for. Everyone has their own different interpretations. I have a different interpretation than probably Preston would or our superintendent at the park. And that's okay. Sometimes visitors don't understand that we don't need to have the answers to everything. We don't need to keep excavating and pulling up things from the ground just to find out answers for ourselves. And that's what we don't do today at the park. We don't stick a shovel in the ground unless it's okay with our tribal partners to do so. So we take very good care of our site and keeping everything preserved as much as possible. But going back to interpretations, some people would say that it was used as a storehouse. It could oversee fields, it could oversee a vast majority of land for people working on canals. Other interpretations are a person of high societal status was staying here in this house. But giving my own personal interpretation, I think of it more as an observatory. Because again, in the past, people didn't have phones, they didn't have the weather app to tell them if it was going to be cold or hot the next day. They needed a calendar of some sort. And that's how a lot of indigenous communities operated. A lot of these structures were counting and keeping track of astronomical alignments that were happening in the sky. There are 2 holes on the eastern side of the Great House, and these holes actually align with the spring and fall equinoxes. You can see in this picture, on the top left, that hole actually keeps aligned with the summer solstice. If you don't know when the summer solstice takes place, it takes place on June 21st of every year. You can see the alignment hole, and this was actually taken this year, this past summer, and you can see once the summer solstice alignment was hitting, you can see at the very top that orange glow. And again, this was important because they needed to know when it was time to harvest certain foods, when it was time to perform certain ceremonial activities. So this is a pretty cool picture that our archaeologist sent us. He was actually out there keeping track of the summer solstice alignment happening that day. I was going to put in a video, but the video wasn't uploading. You can actually see it moving across the Great House walls, but I just got a screenshot of this. So there are 2 main questions that I get at the park every single day. The first one being, where's the bathrooms? The second one being is, well, where did the people go? And of course, that's a question that our museum and our park doesn't do a good job in validating. Because as someone who comes from the Gila River Indian Community, as someone who is Awesome, we've always been in these lands. And so sometimes when visitors come in and they say, well, the people just mysteriously disappeared, they vanished into thin air, but that's not necessarily true. You can see that the Gila River Indian Community is outlined in the yellow. We have 3 other sister tribes, the Achin Indian Community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, as well as the Tohono O'odham Nation. Referring to us as the four sister tribes, we believe in direct descendancy of the people, of course, who built the site itself, who built the great house. We think of ourselves as Otham, and also the people here that resided here as Kulugum were one and the same people. We have another two tribes that have direct descendancy to this site, and that is the Hopi tribe and also the Zuni tribe. And those two tribes are more north of Arizona. And again, it's all about perspectives and what you were taught. At Casa Grande, I always tell people that, people that aren't from here, that aren't from our community, is that we don't always call this place Casa Grande because, again, that's not our traditional name for it. That was a name given by the Spanish when they came through this area in the 1500s. But we will call it Sivivaki. So that is the Otham name for this great house. I know that the Hopi would also call it Nasabi, which means the village in the middle of the valley. And from a Hopi perspective as well, it was said that Hopis had a huge migration that happened. And certain clans actually came through southern Arizona and resided on Compound A within the site itself. So that's a little bit of the Hopi perspective, but again, we do a lot of tribal consultations. We are very in touch with all of our tribal partners, all 6 of them, to make sure that everything is done in the way that they want it, and also educating the public in the way that they would want us to as well. Historically though, before this concept of reservations or border walls or anything like that, all of this was Kulugum land. And you can see the yellow bubble, but of course this was all our territory at one point. So when people ask, well, the people left this compound, well, you can see there's a huge landmass of space that the people could have went to. Kind of like how we move houses. It's the same concept. Archaeologists are in favor that people left because of climate change, that they left because of drought, that they left because of all these other different natural catastrophes. But there are other people from the community that would say it was a result of warfare that caused the people to leave, and that's due to cultural, oral stories and legends and things like that. So while the people were living here on site, you can see that they've created intricate pieces of artwork. The backcountry that we have that the public is not permitted to visit is littered in sherds like these. And this could range from anywhere to red ombre pottery, to Salado polychrome, which is black and white, to Roosevelt redware, to Gila polychrome, and also Hopi yellowware. And that type of pottery is typically found in northern Arizona, which gives more evidence to the fact that there were other tribes that were coming through this site at the time. Here's some more, and you can see that they were easily influenced by their environment, by their surroundings. This one kind of looks like a flower. Bird catching a fish, snake. Basketry was also a common practice in the communities and is very much still done to this day. A lot of baskets that you see are made out of willow, cat's tail, devil's claw, yucca, and things like that. You can see that's devil's claw. Another important piece of jewelry was shells. Shells are something that are still worn today by the tribal communities. You can see that they were making bracelets, rings, making all kinds of designs in the shell work. How they were making these shells and shell etchings is that they would take sap and they would outline their designs on the shells, and they would dip it in saguaro cactus juice. And that juice was very acidic, and so it ate away at everything but the design that was drawn on the shell, and that's how they were able to perform these shell etchings.
So you can tell from a place if people are just surviving there or if they're thriving there. Obviously, the photos that she just showed you guys, you could tell that they were thriving back then because they had the time, they had the drive to make such beautiful pieces of artwork, and creations. The reason why they were able to thrive back then in such a harsh environment was because of these canals here. As you can see, it's a very large canal. Some of these canal systems were large enough to drive small cars through. So in a place that gets less than 10 inches of rain a year, they were able to take water from rivers such as the Gila River and the Salt River and various other rivers and basically move the earth to their will of where they wanted to live and have that water come down and flow. It was said about a crew of 50 could dig about 3 feet a day. So 50 people could dig that big of a space, 3 feet a day. They were very efficient. They dug all these canals with basically, we call it a digging stick. It's just a stick. They didn't have metal back then. They didn't have shovels. They were digging 3 feet a day of these very large canals a day just by sticks. And with being able to have such large canal systems that went so far, they had over 500 miles of irrigation canals, which is just astonishing to me for back then, that they were able to, you can go to the next one, thrive. This is what it would have looked like surrounding Casa Grande back then, completely different than it does today. It was a lush, vibrant agricultural mecca. They were able to grow so many different crops back then. One of them to be a crop that takes a lot of water, which is cotton. I actually was able to speak to a couple of ladies the other day who visited the monument, and they're lifelong cotton farmers. And they were just absolutely astonished of how they basically wrote the book on how to grow cotton, which takes a lot of water to grow. It's not a crop that just needs a little bit of water. It needs a lot. And that just goes to show you their ingenuity, their engineering, that they were able to move that amount of water to grow crops that were so water dependent, such as cotton. Of course, they grew beans, corn, and squash. I'll be good with that the rest of the slides, and then you can keep going. With that being said as well, because they were so good at the engineering and moving that water and so good at farming and agriculture, they weren't heavily as dependent on hunting and gathering as, say, people in other parts geological of the country, for multiple reasons. One, we just don't have the big game here that you have in some other places. And two, because they thrived so well at agriculture and farming, they didn't necessarily have to, as well as more supplementary. A lot of the stuff they hunted was smaller, so some mountain sheep, snakes, rodents, some deers, rabbits, things like that. But because of the massive amount of water that they were able to move, they really could live mostly off of their farmland. And like she said, one of the reasons going back to the holes that they had in there, if anybody's done any planting or gardening, the time of the year is absolutely critical of when you're going to plant your crops and when you're going to harvest them. So for them to be able to go to the Great House and build those holes that line up with those particular moments is really a testament to just their ingenuity, their strength and drive to live in such a harsh environment, to move that much water. She talks about the different theories and reasons of why they kind of decided to go back to maybe smaller community living opposed to a big compound. One of them was is they almost were a victim of their own success, because they were so good at moving so much water that towards the end of them, the height, I guess you could say, of the community living there, that water wasn't going all the way to the end of those communities at the canal systems, because they were taking so much water off of those rivers even back then that the rivers couldn't even support it. So that just gives you an example of how much agricultural land they were actually irrigating back then, that they were able to lower the rivers to such a level that they couldn't flow anymore to the end points of those canals. So there was a lot of water that they were moving. And one of my favorite things about the canal systems is modern day Phoenix, when they went to go and started looking at, okay, we're going to do our studies and use our fancy gizmos and gadgets that they have now, and what's going to be the best routes for us to lay out the canal systems for a major metropolitan area that we have today. Turns out that the original canal systems and those routes back then were the best ones. So a lot of Phoenix's canal systems are either built on or in conjunction, parallel to a lot of the canal systems all the way back then. And it just goes to show you, I mean, they didn't have metal, they didn't have horses and all these things like we do now, but they were able to line up those, moments with the sun. They were able to build such massive canal systems. Like I said, I'm new here and learning, and just every day I'm in awe. Each things that I learned, just the hard work and the ingenuity that they were able to do so long ago that even today we go off of what they did. So it's pretty special and pretty awesome.
So one thing I like to specify for visitors, especially the ones that aren't from Arizona that are coming to visit the parks, of course, are saguaros. In our park itself, we don't have many saguaros, and that's due typically because of climate change. And you wouldn't believe how many people argue with me that climate change does not exist, that we're absolutely fine. But like I said before, when you come to our park, it's very dry. A lot of our vegetation is really dried up. We've had a few saguaros in our park that have unfortunately fallen because, again, we receive less than 10 inches of rain per year. The underground water table is at 250 feet, when in the 1920s it was only at 10 feet. So again, the effects of the agriculture and the vegetation, especially the saguaros, because we're told from a very young age to always respect saguaros, to never hurt or harm them, because when we pass, we come back as a saguaro. And so some people think that's kind of a ridiculous kind of thing to say, but when you're driving along the 87 and it's kind of dark outside and you look in the desert and you see these saguaros, sometimes they look like people, they look like big groups of families. So the saguaros, of course, had a very important place to the people all throughout time, because they could not only use them for resources or their food, but they could also use the wapai, the ribs, for structures, for their homes. In the Great House, you can actually see imprints of saguaro ribs where the ceilings and the floorings once used to be. But the people also had a very big use for their fruits, the bailach. This is a fruit that only grows in the hottest times of the year, in June and July. In our summer times, it gets to 110 and 115 degrees out. So you can only imagine getting up early in the morning before the sun gets blaring hot outside and trying to chicken abundance of this bailach to, of course, make other things like syrup, like jam. One of its more important uses, though, was the ceremonial wine that came from it. So again, I like to emphasize the saguaros because they were used for a multitude of purposes during that time. So,
yeah, I can kind of touch on it again a little bit. I kind of, with the slides that went out, I kind of went into the wildlife a little bit. But as you can see, the deer, they didn't need it to hunt as much as other places needed to, but they still have the ability to here. It's just we just don't have the big game that other places have. But we do have wildlife that's in the area that they would go and use. But again, just when you're that good at something and you're producing that much food. The hunting aspect of it, especially when you don't have the abundance of it, was a smaller part of their food source back then. So
this is an example of some of the textiles that they were creating back then. You can see that they were very intricate in their works.
So we have a ball court on our premise. It was built towards sort of the end of when ball courts were being built. It was estimated that it was built around 1050, and they maybe stopped using it around 1075. So it wasn't being used for very long. The ball court that we have on our premise would have been a smaller ball court compared to other ball courts built in the area. They did find several stone balls kind of coated in a kind of a rubberish sticky substance. They don't have 100% what kind of sort of game that they played. There's several different variants or versions that they played. They think that it would be more to what they often people the closer to the games that they play today. It also would have been a major gathering point. When we have our field trip groups come out, and I'm trying to relate to the kids, I try to tell them it'd be kind of like going to maybe the downtown or the sports arena is at, or a central plaza or park, to where you would have people on there gathered around watching people perform and compete in sports. But also just a place, that the different compounds could come to and gather and talk and maybe see friends or loved ones, who work on it, or live on a different compound. and just a gathering place just to enjoy the day and enjoy each other. So it was a real social place. Again, like I said, the difference between surviving somewhere and thriving somewhere. This is just another case in point that they would have been thriving, that they would have common areas like this that they could go and enjoy spectating each other, competing and enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, so kind of picking up where you left off, Preston. This is a very small ball court, especially compared to some of the ones that you find in Mexico or more south of us. This is relatively small, where some are massive, some are huge, just like this one. But the interesting thing about this ball court is that this ball court is directly southwest of Compound B, which is a platform mound that I was talking about earlier. There are other ball courts throughout the area. If you look at Pueblo Grande, for example, that ball court is found north of that platform mound. Adamsville, which is another prehistoric site, that ball court is found on the east side of that prehistoric site. But it's very interesting because a lot of these ball courts are in conjunction either to the north or the east side of platform mounds. But this is an exception, the one that we have, because again, it is found on the southwest side of our own platform mound. This could have been used for a sort of game, but there are other interpretations that it could have been used in some way as a dancing area, for ceremonial activities or those kinds of other purposes. I do have a picture of the stone balls that they were using. So this is the stone balls, and the substance that Preston was talking about is guayule, which is kind of like a latex, rubbery consistency. And near a lot of ball courts are actually these earthen ovens. The way that I think about it, kind of like how people tailgate at football games or things like that. That's what people were doing here. They were using these to cook, and they were cooking things like agave hearts or cholla buds. And the way that they were doing this is that they would dig a pit out like this. They would put hot rocks and coals at the very bottom. They would put the foods that they were cooking right on top, placing it on top with more hot rocks and coals and things like that, and finally burying it. And they would let these cook for about a day or two. And multiple families could easily eat from these earthen ovens and things like that. But yeah, so the reason why we think that this earthen oven is right near this ball court is possibly to feed the people participating in whatever games or activities they were holding in the ball court, or when the ball court was being constructed, that it was to feed the workers while they were creating it. So I just want to talk a little bit about the damming of the Gila River in the 1920s. Again, when non-community members or people from other states come and visit, they always ask, well, where's the Gila River? Can we go see it? You can, but of course there's nothing running in it. It was dammed in the 1920s by the Department of Interior, at the time who I believe was Hubert Work. And this was very unfortunate, especially for the people living here in these communities. This caused a massive death toll happening in the communities. Because once this water was dammed, of course, water is life, and that's how we survive. That's how the people, the Hooga, a long time ago, were able to sustain themselves, to create their canals so that they could grow things like beans, corn, and squash. Inevitably, it was the lifeline for them. They wouldn't be able to fish or anything like that, but these were attempts to eradicate the people from their ancestral lands. And if you know a little bit about the history during that time too, that was also the time that they were actually trying to relocate the Oppie people to Oklahoma. So again, it was very unfortunate, and there are written documents of people simply, going out to the desert to harvest things like mesquite. But unfortunately, they died where they were because they were too weak and they were starving at that point. So once this water was redirected to supply Phoenix and to building it into what it is today. The people also died taking away their natural foods. Three Sisters, beans, corn, and squash, of course, turned into things like commodities, lard, flour, and sugar, and of course those things aren't natural to our bodies. Those things are very harmful because simply we're just not used to it. And unfortunately this caused a high epidemic of type 2 diabetes, not only in our communities, but in Indian country throughout the US. So I just really like to show this picture just because it shows what the river was like when it was still running. A lot of people have a hard time envisioning what that would have looked like, but you can see that there was vast bodies of water. So, inevitably, I just want to come to the end of our presentation.
Oh, no.